terms of climate change, we're talking the early 80s. Climate change wasn't even a twinkle in Penny Wong's eye. Stationarity of the climate was assumed, and it was also assumed that if there were any long-term climatic trends, they'd have negligible effect on the IFDs. And in terms of delivery, the IFDs were initially delivered via the maps in Volume 2, and subsequently with CEDARS going online, you can get the tables and charts online. So, feedback on the current IFDs. I had originally titled this slide Complaints, where I was told that put a fairly negative spin on it, but honestly, the Bureau did receive more brickbats and bouquets. If you do want to send bouquets to the Bureau for the revised ones, I'll give you my card. The feedback we came was the absence of data from other agents, particularly the continuous rainfall stations. Gold Coast City Council here, their pluviograph continuous rainfall stations weren't included. Sydney Water, there's quite a steep gradient on the Illawarra escarpment, but for a number of reasons, the data from Sydney Water weren't included. And Melbourne Water too. Melbourne Water is constantly providing feedback that the IFDs underestimate the thunderstorm intensity. And I'm sure if I spoke to people here, and as I have spoken to people here tonight, there are other areas where you say, look, the IFDs don't reflect what we're seeing, particularly now. The other issue is the cut-off of 1983 for data means that there's over 25 years more of data. And that includes not only just a temporal length of record, so that we've got an increased database temporally with which to our rainfall frequency analyses, but also the spatial density of the networks. As I was saying, with some of the pluviograph networks, like with Sydney Water, Sydney Catchment Authority, they had their pluviograph stations in place, but they didn't have the requisite 6 years of data that we needed. They do now. Now they've got at least 25 years worth of data. Another point that we've received quite a bit of criticism on is the absence of estimates of IFDs for durations of less than 5 minutes. And what this means is when people do need to derive IFDs for sub 5 minute durations, they're having to extrapolate the existing curves. And there's no consistent approach, no consistent advice provided on how to do this. There's also the, until CEDARS went online, there's also the issue of the subjectivity of the maps. There's about 50 people here today. If I handed you all out a set of maps, all asked you to derive an IFD for a particular location, we'd get close to 50 different estimates because of the subjectivity of the interpretation of the maps. Another issue is the size of the maps. You know what they are, they're A0. When Dave Pilgrim and his team undertook a 1 year after the publication of AR in 87, they had a party, a celebration if you like, and the comment that kept coming back was, why didn't you make the maps A3? Then we could photocopy them. The one that I showed up said, it's impossible to scan. You know, you're not going to go and find an A3 scanner to scan a map. So although the maps were a big advance over AR&R 1977, there were some headaches with them. And the other point, which is becoming more and more important and getting more and more publicity, is the absence of the consideration of climate change in the derivation of the IFDs back in 87. Okay, so that was where we were. A revision of a survey was undertaken after the Canberra Hydrology Symposium of users of AR&R, asking them which of the chapters, which of the books do you consider is most important has the highest priority to review. And it was the IFDs which was identified as the highest priority. For a long time it looked like the revision was going to have to be done on a piecemeal fashion, with initially the capital cities being revised and then gradually other parts of Australia as funding became available. But the Department of Climate Change came to the party and they provided money for the first year of the project, 2008-2009, to the Bureau, with the Bureau providing in-kind contribution, and from last financial year, the Bureau has been funding the project itself. In terms of the Stage 1 deliverables, now Stage 1, as I said, it's a 4-year project. We're halfway through. Stage 1 finishes the end of this calendar year, and the Stage 1's deliverables are a quality controlled database of rainfall and continuous rainfall data collected nationally from all agencies, so not just the Bureau data. In terms of when you look at where we're getting the data from, notwithstanding the fact that other agencies are collecting a lot of data, the Bureau does have a considerable archive of rainfall data. It has records for nearly 20,000 daily red stations, going back to 1800, and it also has nearly 1,500 continuous rainfall stations, both the pluviographs and also the tipping bucket rain gauges. In terms of location, that's where the Bureau's daily red stations are. It shows some interesting things. You can see where the Indian Pacific Railway line is. You can see where the railway line to the north is as well. There's also some interesting gaps. I was in our South Australian office and I was saying to them, "You got data around here? Anyone likely to have collected it?" Well, why would they? Nobody lives there. Okay. Continuous rainfall stations. Obviously, the network is a lot sparser than the daily red stations, but we still have reasonable coverage. But once again, there are still noticeable gaps in the station network. The other source of data, and when I first joined the Bureau and was given the role of project managing the IFD revision, I had a lot of people from our flood forecasting and warning section coming to me and saying, "You've got to use the ERTS data. We're collecting all this data," people like Peter Badley and his group, "and nothing's been done about it." Now, part of the problem internally was that each state, when it archived its ERTS data, archived it in a slightly different fashion. So a project's currently underway to create a central database of all the flood warning data. My team's been providing input into Jim Elliott's group, and so the rainfall data of that database is the most advanced, and we're now moving on to the process of QCing that data. But although the ERTS data may not meet the Bureau's standards in terms of the location of some of the gauges, it does provide a very valuable source in terms of not only infilling missing data when gauges malfunctioned, but also giving us a qualitative perspective of the size of storms and the storm movement. And that's just a picture of where the ERTS rain gauges. That's both the national ones and the Bureau ones. As I said, since publication of AR in '87, the Bureau has received considerable criticism because it didn't use, it only used a small number of non-Bureau stations. As part of the revision, or the current revision, we're required to include data from all agencies. Now, this marries very well with the 2008 water regulations, which require data collecting agencies to provide water information data. Now, that's a range of information from stream flow data to dam storage level data to water allocation data and to climate data, including rainfall data, to the Bureau, which eventually, and it's a 10-year project, which eventually will all be archived in the Australian Water Resources Information System, or AURIS, and made publicly available. So when AURIS comes online, SLAKE, which is the storage level information, is already online, and you can have a look at that on the Bureau's website. But when AURIS comes online in anger, you'll be able to access any water information collected by agencies across Australia from a central location on the Bureau's website.